The mysterious sound in the forest. In mid-October of 2017, near a remote forested area about 50 kilometers north of Ontario, Raymond, a maintenance supervisor, wanted to spend a peaceful morning hunting grouse with his wife and grandson. He had no idea he'd leave that day with a strange recording that still baffles him to this day. On October 14, 2017, around midday in northwestern Ontario, an experienced hunter named Raymond Carter was doing what he'd done hundreds of times before, heading deep into the wilderness to hunt grouse with his family. Raymond knew these woods like the back of his hand. After all, he had been hunting in this same area for over 30 years, and now, he was passing down all the tips and tricks he had learned to his grandson. This particular hunting spot was incredibly remote, over 50 kilometers away from the nearest city. That morning, as Raymond, his wife, and grandson moved slowly through the dense forest, everything seemed perfectly normal. The three of them spread out about 20 yards apart, carefully combing through the underbrush, their eyes scanning for any sign of movement that might mean a grouse was nearby. The crisp October air was cool and refreshing, and it was shaping up to be a perfect day to be outdoors, something Raymond had done for decades. He had his shotgun ready, and as they moved deeper into the forest, he was teaching his grandson how to spot the subtle movements of a bird hidden in the brush. But then something happened. Raymond froze. He heard a sound unlike anything he'd ever heard in his decades of hunting. The sound was distant, strange, and chilling. His wife and grandson stopped too. The three of them stood completely still, straining their ears, trying to make sense of what they were hearing, and then it happened again, but this time it was closer. Raymond immediately reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Whatever was making that sound, he knew he had to record it. People needed to hear this. The noise grew louder, and every time it echoed through the trees, it sent shivers down their spines. It wasn't a wolf's howl, it wasn't a bear's growl, and it definitely wasn't the bugle of an elk. This sound was different, and no matter how hard he tried, Raymond Carter couldn't place it. In mid-October of 2017, near a remote forested area about 50 kilometers north of Ontario, Raymond, a maintenance supervisor, wanted to spend a peaceful morning hunting grouse with his wife and grandson. He had no idea he'd leave that day with a chilling recording that remains unexplained. Raymond was no stranger to the wilderness. He had spent over 30 years hunting in the dense northern forests of Ontario. That day, everything seemed normal as Raymond, his wife, and his grandson spread out about 20 yards apart, quietly moving through the underbrush, scanning for signs of grouse. The cool, crisp air and the familiar sounds of nature made for a perfect morning. But then, Raymond froze. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the forest, something he had never heard in all his years outdoors. It reverberated unnaturally through the trees, as if the very woods were amplifying it. His wife, visibly shaken, grabbed his arm and whispered, "We need to leave now." His grandson, who had moved closer, wore the same look of fear. Raymond kept recording, his instincts telling him that this sound needed to be documented. As they stood in silence, the heavy snapping of branches and the crunching of undergrowth echoed closer. Whatever was making those noises was moving through the forest with immense force, but it remained unseen. His wife pulled on his arm harder now, desperate to leave. Raymond agreed. They quickly began making their way back toward the vehicle, the sound of strange howls and heavy footsteps seeming to follow them. It stayed just out of sight, but close enough to keep their fear growing. Once inside their car, they wasted no time driving away. Later that evening, Raymond played the recording back. Hearing it again sent chills down his spine. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered in the wilderness. Not a wolf's howl, not a bear's growl, and certainly not any animal sound he could recognize. The recording gained attention quickly, racking up views and sparking debate among wildlife experts, scientists, and the public. Yet no one could provide a definitive answer. The Ontario Ministry of Resources and Forestry even launched an investigation, but their findings were inconclusive. Officials suggested it might be a large mammal, possibly a wolf, though they admitted the sound did not match typical wolf vocalizations. What made the incident even stranger was the location. This was a familiar hunting spot, rich with wildlife like black bears, elk, and wolves, animals whose sounds Raymond knew well. Yet, in all their years hunting there, they had never heard anything remotely like this. Some have turned to local folklore for answers. According to Algonquin Native American legends, a creature called the Wendigo roamed these northern forests. Described as a massive, skeletal being, the Wendigo was said to mimic sounds and voices to lure its prey. The Algonquin tribes even blamed unexplained disappearances in the woods on this creature, and historical records show that many people have vanished without a trace in these regions. Though Raymond has never claimed the sound came from a Wendigo, or any creature for that matter, he remains adamant that in all his decades of hunting, he has never heard anything like it. To this day, the recording remains a chilling mystery, unexplained and unforgettable. Like a massive shape move across the road just ahead. Sarah's husband, who was driving, immediately slowed down and scanned the area, but whatever it was had vanished into the dense tree line. The kids in the back seat, growing nervous, asked what it was, but no one had an answer. As they pulled into their driveway and began unloading their car, they all heard a low, guttural growl coming from the forest beyond their property. It was deep and resonant, echoing through the trees. Sarah described it as sounding both animalistic and unnatural, like something much larger than a wolf or bear. Her husband, grabbing a flashlight, pointed it toward the tree line, but the beam barely penetrated the dense woods. Then, the growl turned into a loud coughing sound, similar to a big cat but dragged out and much more intense. Sarah froze as her husband shouted, "Get back in the car!" Without hesitation, they quickly piled back in, locking the doors. From the safety of the vehicle, they watched the edge of the tree line. For a moment, nothing moved, but then they saw it. A large, hunched figure emerged briefly from the trees, its silhouette stark against the snow. It moved on all fours, but its posture was bizarre. Its front limbs seemed longer, muscular and heavy, almost like those of a great ape. Its head was canine, elongated and unnatural, with tall, pointed ears and a slight glow in its eyes when the flashlight hit them. It lingered for just a moment, breathing heavily, before it darted back into the forest with startling speed, its movements jerky and unnatural, like something not quite adapted to the environment. Sarah's family sat in stunned silence, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The coughing sound resumed from deeper in the woods, gradually fading into the distance. The forest, which had been eerily silent before, came alive again with the usual sounds of nature, as though whatever had appeared was now gone, and the forest was settling back to normal. That night, Sarah and her husband combed through online forums, desperate to figure out what they had seen. Descriptions of upright canines, dogmen, and even wendigos matched their experience closely. They found accounts from others in British Columbia and Alberta describing similar encounters, strange coughing noises, large tracks, and sightings of deformed canine-like creatures. What made their encounter even more unsettling was a report Sarah stumbled upon from a family in Wisconsin. The photo attached to that report showed a similar creature lurking along a fence line, its posture and features nearly identical to what Sarah's family had seen. To this day, Sarah refuses to go near the forest at night. Her family installed floodlights and security cameras around their property, but they've yet to capture anything. The coughing sound, however, returned on 2 other occasions in the following weeks, always after dusk, and always coming from the same direction, the woods that bordered their property. While skeptics point to bears, cougars, or other large wildlife as the explanation, Sarah insists what they saw was something entirely different, something that doesn't belong. Some say it's folklore made real, a dogman. Others believe it could be a yet undiscovered predator adapted to the remote Canadian wilderness. Whatever it is, the question remains, what is stalking the forests of British Columbia, central British Columbia? They had set up on a small boat in a calm stretch of water surrounded by thick marshland and tall, dense forests. The only sounds they heard were the occasional ripple of water and the soft hum of insects in the night air. But suddenly an unnatural silence fell over the marsh. The insects stopped. The breeze disappeared. The man recalled feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, like something had shifted in the environment. Then, from the tree line across the marsh, they both heard what he described as a low, guttural growl, followed by a sound resembling labored breathing. It was rhythmic, heavy, and unmistakably large. His girlfriend whispered, "Do you hear that?" They stared into the darkness, straining their eyes and flashlights toward the tree line. The beam of the light reflected off something, a pair of yellow eyes. The eyes were positioned too high to belong to a bear or wolf. They were spaced wide apart, motionless and watching. The couple froze, gripping their fishing rods. Then, with startling speed, whatever it was moved. They could hear heavy steps, thuds against the marshy ground as it circled their location, staying just out of sight. As the man shone his flashlight frantically, they caught fleeting glimpses of something massive darting between the trees. Its silhouette was hunched, muscular, and unlike anything they'd ever seen. At one point, they heard the sound of water splashing nearby, like the creature had entered the marsh. The man, panicked, started the boat's motor, and they sped back to shore without looking back. From behind them, the growls and heavy breathing echoed across the water, gradually fading as they moved farther away. While skeptics point to bears, cougars, or other large wildlife as the explanation, Sarah insists what they saw was something entirely different, something that doesn't belong. Some say it's folklore made real, a dogman. Others believe it could be a yet undiscovered predator adapted to the remote Canadian wilderness. Whatever it is, the question remains, what is stalking the forests of British Columbia? When they returned to shore, they packed up their gear in complete silence. Neither spoke about what they'd encountered until years later. When recounting the story online, the man described the creature as being canine-like but unnatural, similar to the descriptions of Dogman or a deformed wolf. The eyes haunted him the most, yellow, intelligent, and predatory. Other night fishermen who frequented Katy Marsh later came forward with similar reports of hearing heavy breathing, strange coughing sounds, and even seeing large humanoid figures standing at the water's edge before disappearing into the woods. Some locals now refuse to fish there at night, claiming the marsh holds something unnatural. This story adds to the chilling encounters reported across British Columbia and Canada, strange sounds, eerie figures, and unsettling patterns in remote wilderness areas. Whether it's an undiscovered predator, folklore coming to life, or something beyond explanation, these accounts remind us that some regions remain steeped in mystery. 1981, another team of explorers decided to revisit the Hamco ice fields, determined to unravel the mystery left behind by the Appalachian team. This second expedition, made up of experienced mountaineers and survival experts, planned a similar route to the 1957 team. Equipped with better gear and modern mapping tools, they believed they would not only cross the ice fields, but also determine the origin of the strange tracks. The group made steady progress across the snow-covered glaciers for the first 2 days. Conditions were harsh, unrelenting winds, sub-zero temperatures, and a landscape so barren it felt like another planet. Then on the third day they stumbled upon something that shook them to their core. The tracks were back. This time the impressions were even fresher and more pronounced. The same pattern appeared, single-file tracks, perfectly spaced, 8 inches wide and 4 inches deep, continuing for hundreds of yards across the untouched snow. But there was something even more disturbing. These tracks didn't begin or end. It was as if the maker of the prints had simply materialized in the middle of the ice field and disappeared into thin air. The team split up to investigate further, carefully documenting the tracks while keeping constant watch on their surroundings. As they followed the trail, some members reported hearing faint, unidentifiable sounds, like distant murmurs carried on the wind. One climber swore he saw movement on a ridge far in the distance, though when the team pointed their binoculars in the same direction, there was nothing but rock and ice. By evening, a growing sense of unease spread throughout the group. Several team members described an oppressive feeling like they were being watched. They set up camp for the night, but few slept. In the early hours, one climber awoke to a soft but unmistakable sound just outside the tent. It was a low, rumbling noise, a mix between a growl and a hum. Frozen in fear, he didn't dare look outside. Moments later, the sound disappeared, leaving behind an eerie silence. When daylight broke, the climber shared his experience, and the team decided it was time to leave. Retracing their path as quickly as possible, they made their way back to civilization. Upon their return, they shared their findings, tracks, observations, and photographs, much like the Appalachian team had done decades earlier, but the mystery remained. What left those tracks? Was it a previously undiscovered creature, an elaborate trick of the ice, or something beyond explanation? The Hamco ice fields remain as enigmatic as ever, untouched and foreboding, with many mountaineers refusing to venture into its heart. Locals speak of the area with caution, hinting that the First Nations stories about the Snick and Box were warnings, tales that modern explorers have ignored at their peril. In 1977, a second expedition led by Vincent R. Lee set out to cross the ice fields, fully aware of the 1957 team and their strange discovery of unexplained tracks. Lee's team, however, wasn't focused on searching for tracks. They had their sights set on completing their own journey across the vast and unforgiving ice. It didn't take long for the group to notice something shocking. The landscape had changed dramatically since the previous expedition. The ALF Glacier, once a major landmark, had retreated nearly a quarter of a mile from where it had been 20 years earlier. Then, one morning as the team broke down their camp near the glacier, something unusual caught their attention in the snow. Pressed into the powder were large, deep impressions, what Vincent Lee would later describe in the American Alpine Journal as Sasquatch tracks. The team found themselves staring at the exact same kind of footprints reported by the first expedition 2 decades earlier. This discovery reignited old questions about the stories told by indigenous tribes. Were the warnings more than just folklore or campfire tales? Could there be truth in their legends? Eventually, this area would be named Masquatch Pass because of these discoveries. Yet despite all the documentation, measurements, and observations, no one has been able to explain these tracks. Scientists later proposed that the footprints might have been created by small animals bounding through deep snow. When animals like foxes or lynxes leap, their tracks sometimes overlap, creating the illusion of a single file line. As the snow melts and refreezes, the impressions can distort, making them appear larger and more mysterious. But this explanation didn't convince everyone. After all, the teams that found the tracks were highly experienced mountaineers. They could tell the difference between bipedal footprints and patterns left by four-legged animals. Even now, as we approach 2025, the Hamco ice fields remain one of the most remote and challenging landscapes in the world. And while science may offer theories for what those 2 expeditions discovered, there are still those who believe that something else entirely walks these frozen glaciers, something ancient and unseen, leaving its mark on the endless white expanse of Canada's wilderness. In 2019, decades after the events on the glaciers, something strange began happening in the small town of Yale, British Columbia, a quiet community nestled at the base of a towering mountain. My house was right next to a creek that fed into the Fraser River, and at first, the strange occurrences seemed harmless, just unusual. I began noticing red, hazy balls of light moving around the mountain. They were fast, unnaturally fast, and often flickered, pulsing between red and white like distant stars. Weeks passed, and the lights started moving closer. They began gliding over the transport trains, heading down toward the creek near my house. That's when things escalated. The red orbs started flying around my home. They were so bright that my family had to cover the windows just to block them out. Then came Christmas Eve, and everything intensified. The lights appeared every night, painting strange designs across my walls. My son described them as almost fluorescent. Then the temperature in our house began to drop without explanation. It wasn't just cold, it was unnatural, like the house was frozen from the inside out. Fear consumed me. I became convinced we were being watched. I left the house hoping for peace at my daughter's place, but the activity followed us. My daughter and her husband saw it too, the same glowing lights and strange beams piercing the darkness. The most disturbing moment came one night when I saw it, a small figure standing outside. Its eyes were massive and black, and its face bore strange patterns I couldn't comprehend. And behind it, emerging from the same light, was a creature that moved like a dog, but wasn't a dog at all. I know how crazy this all sounds, but it's still happening. To this day, I don't know what to do. If you've made it to the end of this story, comment Canada so I know you're here. If you enjoy diving into strange and mysterious stories told in a cinematic fashion, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content just like this. And as always, keep an open mind, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next episode.